Grief. Grief is a small, innocent-looking word that holds within it so much pain, so much gravitas, so many different emotions that you could literally go on forever. I'd like to take this chance to explore elements of grief, but I warn you ahead that grief is a long road, and there are many different alleyways that come off this road, and sometimes you end up going round in a circle and coming back to the same place, albeit as a different person within yourself. The other thing I want to say is that everyone experiences grief differently. There is no uniformity in how we perceive grief. And that's for many different reasons. First of all, obviously, we're all individuals. But each one of us are grieving a different relationship that we no longer have, a different connection that we have, and every human interaction is different. So, when I grieve for my father, I'm grieving the relationship I had with him. No one else had that relationship with him. When someone grieves their parent, or their sibling, or their child, it's an entirely different dynamic. And therefore, while I'm about to go down the path of expressing some structure because I believe it can help our healing, the introduction I'd like to give is that ultimately there is no structure to grief. Grief is entirely unique. There's an interesting book I recommend you get hold of called The 5 Stages of Grief, written by David Kessler and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And what they do is wonderful. They outline 5 common stages, common emotions that people who are grieving will go through. Denial is stage 1. Anger is stage 2. Bargaining is stage 3. Depression, stage 4. Acceptance is stage 5. Now, each one of these stages is a world into themselves. But I would like to give a little overview of each stage. And I'm sure anyone who's experienced grief will be able to connect with them. But again, I want to ask you to allow yourself to express your own feelings within this framework. This is a framework because having something in common does help. At McKimmey, the organization I'm so privileged to be a part of, when we bring people together who have shared grief, we don't necessarily talk about it, but there's a certain camaraderie, a certain sense of brotherlyhood, sisterliness in the room by having shared a common pain. And obviously that pain is unique, as we've said, but it still brings some sense of comfort. So I think it's important that you may hear these stages and be able to relate to them. But at the same time, I ask you to allow yourself your individuality to grieve in your own way. So let's talk a little bit about them, and we'll close with a thought. The first stage of grief, denial. The human being, a living human being, just cannot comprehend that another human being isn't here. Death is the antithesis of life. It's the extreme polar opposite to everything life personifies. And that's why it can be so hard to actually digest the news and the reality that this loved person is no longer here. And we seek to deny that. And we all know that when we want to deny that feeling, we want to pretend it didn't happen, we can't process those feelings. So denial is a very normal thing. It's a normal stage. It's a common feeling that we will have. And all I can share is to say, when you're in a stage of denial, just allow it to be. Say, right now, I'm not strong enough to accept this reality. Don't fight your feelings. Be with them. Embrace them. And slowly, you'll be able to develop into the next stage, which is anger. Anger may sound negative, but anger's healthy. Anger is an expression of grief. In the denial stage, there was no expression. Anger means the person's come to a place where they acknowledge there is something to be angry about. And there's also a need to clarify who the anger is directed towards and to try and express that anger. Again, be with those feelings, be with that frustration, be with that pain. And for some people, anger comes out in a very submissive manner. It's not necessarily this aggressive anger of running around smashing things. It's a sort of inner anger, and we need to release that anger because pent-up anger isn't healthy for anyone on a physical level, on an emotional level, and it can take its toll on the relationships around us. It's normal then to experience anger. Then comes the funny middle stage, the third stage of bargaining, which is almost slipping back a little bit into the denial stage. It's kind of thinking, maybe there's a way, maybe if a kind of mid-ground of trying to think, can I go back into denial? Did this really happen? And it's deepening the awareness that our loved one is actually gone. It's a very tricky stage. It's an interim stage. It's almost floating between the different feelings we have, just mixed up. And then comes depression. When we come to a deeper realization that our loved one is no longer here. For me, the hardest time is always when it comes to a family celebration, a birthday, or my wedding, for example, or becoming a father for the first time and wanting to look around and see my father being proud of me. That's often the hardest time. We slip into depression. And depression may sound negative, but the positive slant is that we're starting to internalize the reality. And finally, we hope to arrive at acceptance, where we may not be happy about the reality, but we've made peace with the reality. And there is even a sixth stage. They've written a new book, which is finding meaning, and that's perhaps finding some silver lining. But I want to just reiterate, this was a not 60-second, but a very short overview into the feelings of grief. Each one can be expounded upon for many hours and many pages. And what's also normal is to go in cycles. You can go through denial and then sort of come back to it on a deeper level as we process our feelings. I will repeat, it's important to realize that grief is unique, definitely not uniform. Each one of us experiences grief differently, and we should feel empowered to do so. But I do find there is a soothingness to the commonality of being able to relate to feelings and oh yes, I am in denial. Oh yes, I'm just depressed. And that's okay. It's important to embrace our feelings, not to deny them. And I'd just like to finish with this thought. I've always described grief as a 2-liter giant bottle of Coke. This huge big bottle filled with something black, and it's inside our stomach, hidden away deep down within. And it's not a situation people say to me, it's the first question I always get asked, when will I be back to normal? The answer is, you will never be back to normal. There is a new normal, and I encourage you to embrace it. It's not a situation where you can go to 6 sessions of therapy and I'm done with it now. No. These feelings are a part of us. Our grief journey is a part of our life. And we need to realize there is this bottle that can open up at any time. It's impossible to know what might just trigger it. You smell the scent that your loved one used to smell of. You see something that reminds you of them. A situation arises that gets you. And what happens is throughout our lives, we slowly pour out one cup and another cup. I can't tell you if you ever get to the end of the bottle, because I'm not there yet in my journey. I can tell you that it can pop up at random times, and it's okay. It's healthy to be able to close back that bottle and say, I know there's more grief to deal with, but I still need to get back on with my life. I still want to be a normal kid in school. I still need to get back to my job. I still need to be a mother or a father to my children. It's okay to experience those feelings. And when we feel validated in those feelings and when we feel understood, so many people have told me that hearing this analogy, that it's okay to have a package of grief inside, they just feel normal. And as someone once said to me, the wave of grief can wash over us at any time. We just have to learn how to swim. I hope sharing these thoughts and some of my personal feelings with you gives you a feeling of validation. I'm always available to try and continue this discussion in any capacity. May Hashem send us the days where death no longer exists. Bila hamavos lenetzach. May we be able to express our grief in a healthy manner and to never have to know grief or pain ever again. Thank you.